This is not just a problem in academia. This is a problem in our society today. Almost everything we are being taught in very, very wide areas of our lives is wrong, false, incorrect. There is no place in the human diet for carbohydrates, exogenous carbohydrates of any kind.
Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to Bold Carnivore. Today we have a special guest, Professor Bart Kay. We're going to give a wonderful interview. I'm hoping it'll be fun. Good evening, Mr. Bart Kay.
How are you doing?
Oh, I'm very well, sir. Thank you. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me. It's always a privilege and a pleasure to cross-pollinate, and especially with the newer channels as well, with people who are just getting started and just building an audience. So, yeah, very pleased to be here.
Wow. Well, thank you very much. So I've been inspired by several people in the community, Carrie from Homestead How and Professor Bart Kay. I don't know. You're new to me, but I wanted to learn more from you. And Dr. Chafee and many of the other guys in the circle here. And they've just been very welcoming, and I enjoyed it very much. So I wanted to learn more about your story. Could you tell me a little bit about how it is you discovered the proper human diet and what it is that happened when you did?
Yeah. So my history diet-wise, really, I started keto probably at 30-something years ago now, well before it was cool, well before it was, well, the latest round of it being cool anyway, because it's one of those things that comes and goes in terms of the vogues, I guess, in vogue, out of vogue, all of that. Anyway, I was on that bandwagon. I have always been of the opinion that it seemed pretty obvious to me, what with my understanding of the biochemical pathways, the nutrition pathways, all of that, our organ systems, the way that we're designed by natural selection pressures. We are absolutely not designed for the intake of carbohydrate, sugar, fiber, starch, any of the things that we're told we get from plants that we absolutely must have in our lives, etc. I've not believed that all, for a long time. But on the keto lifestyle, obviously there's still quite a bit of plant material and quite a bit of those kind of things that still float around in your diet. Throughout most of my adult life, I've been involved in academia, and that informs and has trained the way I think about science, scientific evidence, the veracity of what's written in science, etc. And I studied broadly in the area of health science and taught in the area of health science. However, I, over a career spanning several decades plus, I had sort of three different epochs during that career that I sort of specialized in and taught three things mostly. They were, firstly, the physiology of rest and exercise. I was an exercise physiologist first. Then I went into human nutrition in the middle, and then I went away from human nutrition for reasons I'm sure we'll talk about in this discussion, and went to cardiovascular pathophysiology for the end of my academic career. And then after X number of years in that, I decided that it didn't seem to matter about changing around specialist areas to get away from people who, for some reason, were in positions of responsibility despite being people who were really very, very struggling. A lot of them very, very limited individuals. So yes, even in academia, even in a field where you would think everybody has it together, no. Despite doing that, I mean, I just went like, yeah, academia is not the place for me to be. It's not what I want to be doing anymore. I don't like what's happened to academia over the space of time I've been involved with it. It's changed completely. I don't even know what it is we're doing here anymore or why we're even doing it, and I don't want to be a part of it anymore. So I decided to go and do something much easier with my life. YouTube creator, YouTube influencer, much easier. I'm joking, by the way. Anyone I did a question in your mind, is doing a YouTube channel hard? Yes. Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a new challenge. It's something different. And I'm pleased to be, doing my own thing and looking at the boss in the mirror.
So you came up through academia for quite a large number of years and found it disappointing and lacking. Now,
Yeah.
was it disappointing and lacking because of the substance of academia in itself or because of the people driving it?
More the latter, I think, on the basis that when I first started training as an academic, I had the, privilege of having a really good academic supervisor who really had his head screwed on, and his entire focus was on training his students, myself included, to think in a way that's scientifically defensible, but not only defensible, unassailable. To take the self-discipline required to make every sentence that comes out of your mouth absolutely unassailable in terms of its scientific validity. And so I've been doing that all along, ever since. And the problem is that almost every course run by almost every university has a curriculum document that tells the person coordinating the course, the lecturer, what it is that they're supposed to teach. Now, if you are an average to middling level academic in terms of your actual academic ability and your actual self-discipline of thought and your knowledge of all of that stuff, that's not a problem to you, because quite frankly, you don't know that what you're teaching is wrong from the ground up. And as such, you can sleep well at night and you can get up the next day and go and teach the same stupid thing again. And then next year you can come back and do the same stupid thing and teach the next class of students the same wrong thing. And no one's going to bat an eyelid because that's what it says in the curriculum document. So that's fine. The conflict with that is that an academic, by every legal statute in every reasonable westernized nation that has university education, they all say that an academic is entitled to hold and espouse any opinion he or she should see fit for any reason, whether that's popular or not, actually. So academic freedom guarantees me the right to look at what it says in a textbook and say, here's what the textbook says, class. However, here's what you need to understand about the fallacies, foibles, flaws, and falsehoods of what it says in the textbook if you apply the scientific disciplines that I was referring to earlier about how to think, what you can say, what you can't say, what words to use in what circumstances. And often the idea that holds sway is not actually the scientific reality of the situation. And as such, it's not only my right as an academic, but it's my responsibility to teach students that. So that often puts me in conflict. When I was in that industry for more than 2 decades, that would put me in conflict with deans of departments and things who say, okay, so I hear you saying sorts of crazy things in class, to which the response is always, no, not one single crazy thing. In fact, absolutely everything I've said is unassailable. And even if it wasn't, so what? I'm allowed to say it. There's nothing you can do about it. Ah, yes, but curriculum document says, blah, 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 this is what we teach. So, well, that's fine, so long as curriculum document doesn't impinge on my legal right to tell students whatever I should see fit, actually. The thing is, you interviewed me for this job here at this university. You asked me, what is it that sets me apart from every other academic that's applying here? Why should we give you the job? I sat here, I looked you in the eye and I said, well, it's precisely because I will go that extra mile. I will go that bit deeper. I will take students to a place of discomfort. I will show them that what it says in the textbook is no good. I will teach the next generation of people to start reapplying the scientific discipline we used to have before the last few generations watered it down, diluted it, and destroyed it. I will bring that back. That is why you give me the job. And they say, oh, very good, and write it down, raw. And then I get the phone call later in the week, yes, you're the preferred candidate. Come and work for us. So you show up and you start teaching, and then 6 months later, you get a knock on the door, or you get a summons, more likely, to the dean's office. No, I hear you've been saying all sorts of crazy things in class in your first 6 months teaching here. And then the thing goes round and round and round. So it's quite stunning, really, that I even managed to do a number of years, including over a decade, in one of the three different areas that I kind of focused in throughout my career before deciding, actually, nah. Yeah, it's definitely a people problem. Science is just a discipline. Science is just a means of providing ourselves with best educated understanding of phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is people interpreting things the way they want to interpret things and forgetting the disciplines.
The drive of feelings over facts.
Well, that's another way of talking about the same sort of thing. Or, if something is popular or holds sway, then it's deemed to be correct, even though there's no evidence that it is correct. So it's a tough one, and it's one that I don't see the solution to. I really think that the whole playing field in academia has completely shifted its focus away from scientific discipline and the acquisition of pure and applied experimental knowledge, which is what science is. And instead, we've replaced all of those teachings with discussing what gender somebody is and how many genders are there, and every child wins a prize. And your opinion, yes, yours too, is just as valid because you hold it, not because your opinion actually necessarily is educated or worth listening to. Yes, I understand that most people have opinions on most things, but I mean, most people have anal orifices too, and they're also full of shit. So,
Yes, sir. I have found in my own experience that is the case. And if you give people enough time, they'll usually show you exactly who and what they are.
Yep. Basically, I mean, the focus on academia when I first got started was rigor, discipline, standards. We are a professional body of scientists. We want to be taken seriously as those who are helping to build that knowledge base in that way, following that discipline. And now, instead of disciplines, knowledge, standards, now it's all about what was the student experience? What was the feedback we got on the forms at the end of the course? Did they like us? Did they feel included? Did we use the right pronouns to describe the class members?
Yeah, you may as well be asking how many angels dance on the head of a pin. So that led obviously to conflicts within your departments and probably in extra departments. What was a memorable moment for you?
I think there were many at various different stations. I mean, I worked at different levels in academia throughout that 2 and a bit decade career in that industry. I started out as a graduate teaching assistant after I finished my initial undergraduate degree. Actually, I went straight into being a lackey for the lecturers, basically, is what it was, and someone who did the running around and taught some courses and held tutorial sessions and marked work and did, all of that kind of stuff. And at various times, I also had roles in academia, but outside of being an academic, like I was actually managing a laboratory for a while as well as a, they were called allied staff, not academic staff. I wasn't teaching. I wasn't required to research. I was required to look after the day-to-day running of a physiology-based laboratory, research laboratory. And then back into academia after a couple of years doing that, at a more senior level, at an actual a lecturer's job once I finished my terminal degree, and did the usual thing and went and did an overseas experience, which is the normal course of events. You finish your terminal degree and then you go and work in someone's research lab somewhere around the world for a bit. So I went and did some of that, came back, got a lectureship of my own. My own turnip in the country, so it was. No, it wasn't a turnip, although it turned out to be just as useful. So I did, I started lecturing, and then it was senior lecturer, and, then it was up to and ultimately up to the professor rank. But none of it was a comfortable ride. Mm. There were academics that were on different career paths, dealing with things in a different way, by towing the line and by going along with this watering down of standards, discipline, all of that, and getting alongside this this other ideology that's become pervasive throughout society, not just academia. Mm-hmm. And good luck to them. They will end up with their own professorship in the country, perhaps somewhere at some point, with a mid-range academic salary, probably, which will be somewhere between 80 and 120,000 maximum, and that is where they will stay, most of them, until they retire or die or whatever. And then that's another thing that the bloke that taught me how to think about science properly taught me. He also said to me, what you also need to understand is that the way science is thought about and communicated about, the progress of science occurs one funeral at a time. Which makes sense, really, because as an academic, we are thought of as the people who have the answers, who are infallible. We are the ones who provide the evidence. When people who are perhaps not academically minded or experienced or whatever get into these debates and arguments, they're always talking about, show me the proof, and it's always peer-reviewed scientific evidence is what they're talking about, is the so-called proof. Mm-hmm. That's another thing we can talk about either today or another time if you like. As to
I would love to.
Not so much, but we're thought of as the arbiters of truth, and as such, it's our responsibility to behave that way. And sadly, that's gone now.
So as the old guard passes and the new comes up, the standards are watered down from what they have learned and then what they have learned, and so you end up with nothing but cabbage water.
Yeah, sure.
And as you couldn't stomach your cabbage water, you got out.
Sure. Yep.
What was the inciting incident?
I don't think there was any one inciting incident. I think it's just a cumulative fatigue. Whenever you bash your head up against a brick wall for long enough, sooner or later, even with a skin as thick as mine and a skull as thick as mine, you get to a point where you go like, actually, is there something better I could be doing with my time here? Am I getting out of this what I should be getting out of this? Because, one's occupation, one's raison d'etre, if you like, it is just that. It's especially in today's society, people's jobs, people's careers become their whole identity almost. So you might as well do something that you're actually going to enjoy. And I wasn't enjoying it. There was a point where I was on a fixed contract for a 3-year period to teach out a certain course at a university I was working at that time. And I finished that period. It was a 3-year period of employment to teach out a 3-year degree structure that they needed to replace one staff member to go through the last class, because that university was then dropping that course altogether. So at the end of that period, they could either redeploy me to another department, which they didn't want to do, and I didn't want to stay there either. Did I want to go through the rigmarole of finding another academic job and going through the whole thing and doing interviews and traveling around the country I was living in at the time and all of that stuff again? No, I was done at that point. There had been the usual sort of rigmarole and silliness with the management at that particular place. There's no two ways about it. There was. But I handled that the same way as I handled it everywhere else I'd ever been. There was nothing special about those particular individuals in terms of their behavior. And so I was quite expert at dealing with it and placing myself once again in the unassailable position, which doesn't win you any points for employee of the year and doesn't win you necessarily redeployment to another department, which I wouldn't have accepted anyway in this case, as I said. So yeah, they were like, okay, well, that's the end of that. Good luck to you, and here's your holiday pay. And I was like, thanks very much. See you then. Yeah. So that was it. No one thing, just a pile of things over 20-something years that just got worse and worse, really.
Wow.
I mean, what we're really talking about here is attempts at bullying, which anyone that knows anything about me or my personality, anyone that's watched even 5 or 10 minutes of my videos will know that trying to bully me is going to be a fruitless endeavor. But that's the only technique they've got to try and control the behavior of someone who is operating at a level above where they thought that person was operating.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I really can.
Mm.
And so you find that they don't have any new argumentation. It's just all the same thing.
Yep.
What's the actual basis, though, other than, you're teaching crazy things and let it go, I mean, what were you teaching that was contrary that they couldn't stomach?
Well, it depends from department to department and depending on exactly what it was that we were talking about at the time. I'll give you some examples just for fun. From my first 10 years, I was in exercise physiology, and there were some ideas in exercise physiology. I'll just run through a few ideas that people in exercise physiology say, and they go, this is how it is. Okay. We have 3 energy systems in our body. One's aerobic, 2 of them are anaerobic. You've got an alactic and a lactic anaerobic system. And the thing that determines the use of those systems is oxygen availability. And you can look up in a textbook and you can see that that's what it says, and that's how it's explained to a first-year student. The problem with that is it's wrong. That is not how the human metabolic system works. That's not how muscle energetics works at all. It is false, demonstrably false. And to run through why it's false, that's a whole lecture. That's a whole couple of lectures. But take my word for it. The research data that's available in the peer-reviewed literature proves it quite clearly. Once you understand the totality of what's understood about how it works, you go, okay, I see how it works, and it works like this, not like that. That causes friction.
So that's not just an oversimplification. That's actually ignoring good evidence.
Yeah. Well, it's both. It's oversimplification and it's ignoring evidence. But on top of that, it's also pushing forward and promoting a canon, a dogma, an idea that is unfortunately false. Not maybe false, not, there's some problems with this theory a little bit. It's wrong, for example. Another example, during exercise, you produce lactic acid, and lactic acid causes muscle fatigue. No, wrong again. Mm-hmm. That is false. Look up and you look in a textbook, it'll tell you that that's what the case is. You exercise, it causes lactic acid, and that causes muscle fatigue, is what it says. Well, no, it doesn't. And again, the reasons why I'm saying that is another whole discussion. This is just for the examples of things that are wrong, that are taught to people at university level. When I did my first undergraduate degree, which was in exercise physiology, I got to the end of the 3 years and I was pretty unhappy with what they taught. I actually didn't buy it. Even as a student, I went, that isn't right. And this is where I started to go and read the literature and put together these models that I now use that are not incorrect. The ones that get me in trouble for telling students, hey, you need to know this paper here exists, read this one, because it shows this to be, yeah, I'm not sure exactly where I'm going with that.
That's all right. That's all right.
Long road. So it's a rich tapestry.
Wow. But those are some good examples, really, because if you can get yourself in trouble by pointing people to genuine information, we've got a serious problem.
Correct. Again, this is not just a problem in academia. This is a problem in our society today.
Well, go on and unload on that one. What do you mean when you say it's a systematic and or a societal issue?
Well, good, robust information with validity and veracity based on actual scientific empirical evidence according to the standard of proof required for a given assertion. Almost everything we are being taught in very, very wide areas of our lives is wrong, false, incorrect, damaging, dangerous.
Do you feel that's by design or by incident?
Yes, by design. Yeah, our society, has got to a point, and it has been clearly demonstrated in the last 3-4 years. There is a faction, a powerful faction, who have taken it upon themselves to be not only the arbiters of truth and justice and correctness and everything that's good and light, but also executioners as well, which they do both overtly, directly, and
covertly. Yeah, they do it both ways. I agree with you. And yes,
but they also do it covertly, subvertly, behind the scenes with some very, very clever mass formation, psychosis, manipulation of people.
We are in agreement, sir.
Whoever they may be, we can't actually mention who they are or what we're talking about here in any way, shape, or form, because they're not safe topics to speak about publicly on such platform as, for example, YouTube's. They have rules about what you can say. So I'm just kind of, if I seem like I'm being overly cautious, it's because I'm on someone else's channel and I'm just making sure I'm staying within the rules.
Well, I certainly appreciate that, sir, but I'm not shy about those particular subjects, sir. And I do know that our world is not what it seems. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's really the point I wanted to make. There's not really much more to add. That, as soon as someone sets themselves up as the arbiter of truth, trust us, trust the science, they say, which is the most anti-science thing that it's possible to say, because questioning the science is exactly how you do science.
Mm-hmm.
My responsibility as an academic, while I was working in that field, researching in laboratories, publishing research works, my responsibility was to do everything possible to disprove any hypothesis I wanted to put forward. And I think that's one of the first rules that most academics seem to have forgotten. The whole point of a hypothesis is that it has an accept or reject, and there are criteria by which you would do those things. Acceptance or rejection of a hypothesis. So another example that gets me in trouble, or used to get me in trouble, teaching students in nutrition, my second area of expertise, once I said that's enough from exercise physiology. Maybe the problem maybe here is I was dealing with sport heads. Sure, they were academic sport heads, but nonetheless, these are all sporting people. Maybe they just don't get it with the intellect thing, with the how to do science thing. I'm going to go and do human nutrition because that's much more scientific, I thought. What an idiot.
You were
What an
young.
absolute. I'll tell you exactly how much human nutrition science exists. None. Here's why. In any branch of science, if you want to suggest cause and effect, then you must provide experimental data collected on otherwise identical subpopulations drawn from the population at large, but your two populations need to be identical at the outset. They need to be controlled in every aspect, except for the one thing that you are suggesting that will have an effect. In other words, take all the degrees of freedom out of this thing and see if this expected hypothesized relationship between variable X and variable Y holds. If it does, you can say the relationship held. If it doesn't, you can say, well, now we can reject that hypothesis as being of utility and move on to the next thing, pretty much. Human health, human nutrition science is about results at the end of a 30, 40, 50-year period of exposure to lifestyle factors. In this case, in the field of nutrition, what are you eating? What are you not eating, for example? There are a lot of things that play into someone's health and longevity prospects over 30 and 40 years other than the food they eat. Sure, food's important. But so is not drinking, not smoking, getting enough exercise, getting enough fresh air, getting sunlight, living an anti-inflammatory lifestyle, encouraging your adult stem cell repair and your renewal system to do what it does. Don't poison yourself with non-food items for your species, that kind of stuff. They all play it. Now, at the end of a 30 or 40-year follow-up period of one of the studies that they do, having controlled none of that stuff, you can't comment on, all you can comment on for each individual person in that study is, are they now dead or are they still alive at the end of let's say it's a 40-year study. You can't say this person is dead and it's 20% because they smoked, 30% because they had a bad diet, 50% because they didn't exercise, and small change beyond that, other factors. You cannot ascribe the causality of that person's death to those causal factors precisely because you haven't locked that person in a laboratory with his or her genetically identical twin locked in another laboratory under the exact same controls except for the exposure to the so-called problem. And the one I'm obviously
an ethic issue there.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's tough to get it past ethics to say, hey, we want to split up some genetically identical human twins at birth because we need everything controlled right from the very outset. And we're going to lock them in separate laboratories. We're going to control every aspect of their lives down to the nth degree, except half of them we're going to feed a bunch of cholesterol to and half of them we're not, and see how many of them get heart disease in each population. That will not inform us on any cause and effect relationship that may or may not exist between cholesterol and heart disease.
And yet they seem to act like that's exactly what we should expect.
What they have is associative data, precisely because they can't do the science. Oh, well, we can't do that kind of science. So the best we've got are these epidemiological studies, these prospective cohort studies. Isn't this great, though? We've got millions and millions of person years of follow-up here. This is a very powerful study. And it tells us quite clearly, they'll say to you that the risk, they'll say, of all-cause mortality on a carnivore diet is 30% higher.
Not
To which
buying
I
it.
say, well, okay, a couple of responses there immediately. Number one, 30% higher than what? What's the baseline incidence of mortality in the study concerned? What you'll generally find in these prospective cohort studies, we followed some people for X number of years. Generally, you'll find that they are usually 50 plus and sometimes 60 plus years of age at the outset, these populations. Now, why is that? Well, because younger people don't tend to die so much, and so you don't really get anything worth reporting. So we have to rely on an aged population who, by virtue of being aged, are more likely to die in any given year, so that we actually get enough deaths to report any differences at all, even statistically. We still need to follow millions of people in these studies to get anything even statistically significant. And then what we do is say, oh, look, this is this massive 30% change in risk, they say. Well, the baseline is about 8 per 10,000. Even in the aged people in these studies, typically. So for every 10,000 person years of follow-up, there are 8 cases of mortality at baseline generally, i.e. in your control population, the non-cholesterol people, shall we say. In the cholesterol people, once we adjust the number from what it was that we actually observed to something different from that because we felt like it, we didn't control anything before the study, ergo our study has no veracity and no ability to claim one cause and effect. But what we should just do is report what we saw, yeah? And say, this is what we observed. No, what they do instead is say, well, hey, we didn't control age, smoking, drinking, educational status, blah, 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 blah. So instead of controlling it at the outset, like we should have done to do an actual experimental study, why don't we imagine that we know how much each of those things contributed or didn't contribute to someone dying or not, and then adjust the number of deaths from what it actually was to what it would have been under that assumption. That's not doing science, is it?
No, that's a hypothesis built up on assumption.
It's fabrication. It belongs in the fiction section. See, a scientist conceives of a question, a hypothesis, plans an intervention that is able to inform on that hypothesis, controls everything adequately to make sure that there are no confounders, covariates, collinearities, things that destroy our ability to say this was the cause of that. And we look at those things in isolation and report on that. Not we get a bunch of people in the millions of people. We ask them on one occasion, usually, so what is it that you eat, by the way, by giving them a survey, how many of these things do you eat every day, week, or whatever. They tick all sorts of boxes, write down all sorts of lies about what they've been eating. Write this down, by the way, people. People tell lies. And then the researchers believe the lies that they were told about what people are eating. And then they left them alone for a few years and then got back with those people and found out how many of them are still alive and how many of them have died. And then they ignore those numbers and adjust them to something else and report, this is very dangerous, this cholesterol thing. Even if what the association that they're reporting was what was observed in the first place, which it wasn't, even if it was, it's still not a causal relationship. It would be association.
Loose association.
Exactly. I mean, there are all sorts of things that are associated with all sorts of things, aren't there? For example, the sale of ice cream at the beach at Miami on any given day is highly correlated with sunburn occurring on that day. So you sell a lot of ice creams, you get a lot of sunburn that day at that beach. Ergo, the problem is clearly the ice cream. Let's outlaw that.
Makes sense to me.
That's what we've got with cholesterol.
That's right. Ban ice cream right now.
That's right. Or even better, here's a drug that makes ice cream safe.
Oh my God.
This will lower your ice cream level, this drug. Lots of side effects, but don't worry about that. Safe and effective. And all of those kind of things. Here's another, just for fun, here's a few more associations. Every time you turn on the television and see footage of the latest horrific forest fire happening somewhere in the world, every single time you'll see fire crews running around, won't you?
Yes, sir.
So let's get rid of those buggers.
Yeah, they're responsible.
They're every time. They must be the cause of these fires. Let's get them out of here. It's ridiculous. It's the furthest thing from science you could possibly imagine. It's beyond laughable.
Yeah, we are in 100% agreement on these things.
Good.
Yeah.
You can disagree with me if you like, of course, but that's hate speech, defined as such. Because I said so.
And now I'm allowed to say it, but no one's allowed to see it.
That's it. Of course, the other thing that we need to know in modern society is the way to be right is to use the magic 2 words, I'm offended.
Yeah.
Apparently that puts you in the right.
Or I feel.
Here is how to deal with that sort of 2-word thing, or that whole way of people approaching things. You can actually deal with those 2 words using just one.
What's it?
I find. Here it is. Are you ready?
Go for
It's
it.
quite a short word too. 2 letters. So?
It's very Socratic.
I'm offended. So? How does that change anything? Does that change the reality of the situation? Does that change how anybody perceives anything? Your offense is of no interest to me.
Wow.
Anyway. Yeah, good fun.
I could see offense being interesting in one way, but only like clinically. Like, okay, so you're offended. Kind of speaks more about you and how you perceive the world. It may be a little bit askew. I'm no psychologist, but wow. So moving on about nutrition, though, I have heard about several points of controversy coming up in our crew mostly about the intake of fruit and fructose, especially in the form of honey. So what would be your thoughts on that?
Okay. There is no place in the human diet for carbohydrates, exogenous carbohydrates of any kind. You do not have a dietary requirement for carbohydrate of the fructose variety. Neither do you have a dietary requirement for the glucose variety or the galactose variety or the maltose variety or pretty much any of those varieties. Your body is capable of producing and maintaining its level of all the carbohydrates that it does need for various tissues at various times. It has systems for that, and it does not require you to put any carbohydrate in your body whatsoever. And in practice, most people choose to put some in anyway. In a very, very, very small amount, carbohydrate is unlikely to do any immediate damage, or indeed any really meaningful long-term damage at very low levels in people under the right circumstances, meaning having really good genes, having really good habits otherwise, being highly anti-inflammatory otherwise, et cetera, that kind of stuff. These are all mitigating things. But at the end of the day, carbohydrates, extra carbohydrates taken in from outside the body, totally unnecessary under any circumstances. It's a choice. If you're putting carbohydrates in your body, it's because you choose to. It's not because you need to. Just understand that, basically, if you understand nothing else. And also understand that at some point, it's likely that you'll pay a price for it. Whether that's immediately or long-term, it's hard to say. That's a rich tapestry.
All right. The going theory has been put forward that it may be that due to high carbohydrate consumption, that some of the systems that produce sugar-based energy within the body may be injured and or damaged, and then incapable of producing enough, right? And so some people taking androgynous forms may experience some benefit. What do you think? You don't think that's a possibility?
I don't buy it. At the end of the day, the exogenous extra carbohydrate is a toxin. Sure, it will have negative effects on your body at large, but your ability to produce carbohydrate from non-carbohydrate sources, the gluconeogenic pathway, is a series of hard encoded enzymes. Each enzyme is a protein made up of amino acids encoded for by a length of DNA that says make that.
And so it's highly unlikely to be damaged.
Exactly. You would have to actually damage your genes themselves or some other component of the process that starts with the transcription of messenger RNA and ends with the production of the enzymes that facilitate the production of the glucose from the non-glucose precursors.
Do you think that GMO foods might actually be able to do that kind of damage?
It's not impossible. Most GMO organisms that are floating around at the moment, most of those are plant-based. And most of them are plants that are being altered in such a way as to make them more resistant to glyphosate, for example. So we can dump a bunch of glyphosate on this soy field, kill off all the other weeds. The soy remains viable, and we can then harvest the soy and feed that to the people along with the residual toxin of the glyphosate, of course. But that's for another day. Safe and effective glyphosate, apparently.
I take issue with the idea that glyphosate will ever be safe or effective, but careful with what we say, I'm sure. Anyway, I wanted to ask you about how it is you hit on humor. Why is it that your channel happens to dip more towards the humorous side anyway? Is it just your particular branch or your brand, just how you enjoy it, or did you do that because it gets clicks?
I originally started doing the kind of things I was doing because it seemed to help me with getting noticed. It did win me a kind of a cult following, a cult audience, which was great. There are a certain faction who enjoy what I do very much in terms of the abrasive stuff, the sweary stuff, the character actors, all the stuff I do on my channel. And there are others who hate that stuff and can't stand what I do or how I do it and wish I would just stop and dry up it. Well, that's true of every YouTube channel, actually. I mean, if people respond to your YouTube channel like, meh, if you haven't done your job. I think one needs to be subversive, at least in some way or another. There needs to be a point of difference. Because there are a bunch of people offering ostensibly the same or at least very, very similar advice or thoughts to what I'm espousing. Most of them actually get many of those ideas directly from me, and I'm happy with that. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. Some of them came to some of those conclusions without my help by themselves. Great. Because I'm not the only one that understands this, and I've never claimed to be. But there needs to be something that gets the attention of a viewer in some way. So it did help in the developmental stages. And now potentially it's turned out to be a double-edged sword in a lot of ways, because I'm now on the wrong side of a bloke called Al Gore and his rhythms at the YouTubes. And I mean the algorithm. I don't mean any actual person called Al Gore, for goodness sake. Do try and keep up, people. There's an algorithm that YouTube runs that is a thing that promotes or doesn't promote a channel to get that channel to be seen by others. And there are a lot of things that play into whether a person's videos or a person's channel gets put forward, gets promoted, gets to grow, gets the audience that it deserves, or whether it doesn't get that. One of the things that YouTube are not happy with is anybody questioning various authorities. So it's the appeal to authority fallacy, basically. You are not allowed an opinion on several topics. There are several topics which are topics du jour, which a certain faction of society, let's call them leftward-leaning folks.
That's kind.
You know, I'm not going to call them progressive because there's nothing progressive about it. Actually, it's regressive in the biggest way possible, as far as I can see. But nonetheless, we're not here for politics. That's what you get.
Hey.
It's a tough road.
Well, I agree with you. And I think that's why the community is so very vital. It is important that we come together and start pushing forward what it is we would like to see grow from ground up, because I think that that's the way forward.
Yeah, agreed.
So Who are some of your heroes?
Right. In the space, talking about nutrition and health generally, I think Anthony Chaffee is a great source of information. And not because he has a medical degree. That's got nothing to do with it, in fact. It's because what he's saying is correct. I don't care if he's got a medical degree or whether he hasn't qualified with a high school diploma. If what he's saying is correct, then he'll have my respect. So Anthony Chaffee as well. Shawn Baker, same argument. Okay, again, not because he's a doctor, because what he's saying is correct. I like Dr. Sarah Pugh. She's a good friend of mine. I enjoy her information. I have quite a bit of respect for Harry Sopanos, who is not scientifically qualified. But what he's saying, he has researched or reviewed sufficiently to speak about it intelligently enough and say things that are correct, that I don't care. There was a young man whose name eludes me and whose name will always elude me now, who I helped promote his channel, actually from 1,000 subscribers all the way up to 20,000 in a couple of weeks by letting people know he existed. This was a 19-year-old kid with a apparently very high intelligence level saying exactly the right things about nutrition. Great. Let's grab him at this young age. Let's promote him. Let's get his channel going. Let's make it easy for this, because this is a great thing for us. And then, of course, his ego got the better of him and he decided he knew everything. In fact, more than I did, even though I've been an academic working and researching in the field that he was talking in longer than he'd been on the planet. But that's, of course, how youth are, isn't it? And you went completely off the rails.
Oh, dear.
So, again, if someone is young but says the right stuff, you'll get my respect. The moment you open your mouth and say the wrong thing, well, the hammer's going to come down, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
I make no apology for it. Why the hell should I? I mean, I changed the name of my channel a few years ago to Bart Kay Health Science. Before that, it was Bart Kay Nutrition Science Watchdog. And specifically, absolutely every single video I made was about who was wrong on the internet and blah, 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 and much, much more sweary and more abrasive than the way I do things now. It was a different character again. And, there came a point, okay, that got me notoriety. It got me the audience, as I was talking about before. But then it gets you banned because the accepted narrative is vegetable rights and peace, veganism, save the planet somehow. Not sure how that works. Or why it needs saving and from what. That's also for another day. And don't question the good grown-up adults at science. Even though I am a scientist myself, of some repute or ill repute, if you like, whatever, and even though I have quite a bit of experience of doing science, which, as I said, requires me absolutely to question the science, it's how you do it. No, I can't have an opinion, or I can have an opinion so long as it's an accepted one, sort of thing. It's a tough road.
Well, by this juncture, I'll take a scientist of ill repute over one that's in good standing.
Exactly. Yes, me too.
So another thing I wanted to cover, I don't know if you're up on the news about the Dutch government having done what they've done to the farmers. I was a little bit confused by that because I haven't had a chance to really sit down and dig into it. But I wondered if you were on the cutting edge or not.
Not really. My understanding is that under the premise that agricultural activity is problematic to the environment, and more so than any other land use, that as a nation, the Dutch have decided to set some target for so-called emissions, and they've targeted an industry, that being farming, and now my understanding is compulsorily acquiring Dutch farmers' land or giving them a payout to get off the land and go and do something else. That's as far as I understand it. So again, the assumption is that the farming is problematic to the environment more so than anything else they're going to do with that same piece of land once they stop farming it. I'm not sure I buy it. Quite sure I don't, in fact.
I'm quite certain that I don't, sir.
Hmm.
Well, I thank you for what you do know about it. I'm going to have to look into it more myself.
Hmm.
So,
But that's really all we can do. At the end of the day is ask someone to put any preconceived ideas they have in any given area to one side for just long enough, to have an open mind for just long enough to look at what's actually out there by way of the actual empirical evidences. Now, the difficulty with that is this. A person who has not had a significant number of years of in-service training in the field of producing scientific works, doing statistical analyses of data sets that they themselves have collected, those people are not competent to assess that so-called evidence for veracity. They have to take the word of the good people of science. So they think. What I'm suggesting is, wouldn't it be great if more people would take the responsibility to train themselves about what science is, what the disciplines are, what the standards are, what's required of a scientist who wants to, for example, assert causality, and then train themselves on what statistical procedures are undertaken on these data sets to make these inferences, and do those statistical inferences stand up under refutation?
I would wonder about the complex nature of just that very idea, and if that's not too daunting for the average fellow.
Well, it is. And that's why they go, oh, well, the scientists all agree, so it must be right.
Is there a way to simplify that or automate it to some extent?
I don't think so. I think it's another example of the same sort of thing is, while scientists speak in their own language of inference, statistical inference, etc., that is inaccessible to the lay person, physicians do the same thing in their field. They have their own language, and they speak to people in a way that's inaccessible precisely so they can control those people.
I think it's because it's actually a kind of a society within itself too, isn't it? Language and society subsist together. And to that degree, if you're not an in member, you're definitely an out member. I guess it's problematic though when the in member or the in group decides that the out group is not necessary,
or indeed subversive, dangerous, and to be held down at all costs.
I believe we've seen some examples of that recently.
Yes.
I wonder how long it'd take for them to show their fangs again.
Don't know.
Well, I, for one, sir, I'm in the group of our militia. I would suggest that, and I like that there's that sign, that meet militia sign. I'm going to just kind of harp on that one for a moment. If they say mask up again, I say no. If they say take this, I say no. If they say follow the leader, I say, I don't know the leader. That's where I'm at on it.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time, and I'd like to save something left over for if we have another meeting. So,
I'm sure
have you got any parting words of wisdom for our guests?
Yes, binge watch all my videos. You'll learn a lot. And when you've done that, you'll find my back catalogue of videos that used to be on YouTube that no longer are, because YouTube changed the rules halfway through the game and then started applying the rules to videos that were posted that didn't break the rules at the time they were posted, and tried to penalize people for that. So all of them, they all had to come down and go off to a different platform. So they're over there on the Odyssey platform, ODYSEE. ODYSEE. You can find all that stuff there. Hours and hours of entertainment for children of all ages, over 18, of course. There's probably something like 2,000 videos in my back catalogue now.
Nice.
Of various different production qualities and various different, of playing different characters and approaching things in a different way at different times to try and get a message across in different ways. Watch the lot. You'll find, if you find half a dozen of those videos that resonate, you'll be ahead of most of your peers in terms of your understanding of where the problems are.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Professor Bart Kay, for coming on and It's been fabulous, and I'd like to have you on again if you're of a mind to.
Of course, my pleasure. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, be bold, everybody.